Augustus was born Gaius Octavius on September 23 in the year 63 BC. In the city of Rome, his birthplace was located on the Palatine Hill. One of the most prestigious areas of the ancient city. Augustus would become the first emperor of Rome, and his name continues to resonate through history. He is one of the most influential leaders in the story of mankind throughout his life. He stood as a brilliant strategist, exceptionally intelligent, calculating, and owner of immense power. The Roman historian Suetonius wrote the following about him: he surpassed all his predecessors in wisdom, and in the arts of government. The Roman ruler fascinated many people in his time to this day. He continues to inspire many. His life trajectory is widely studied, researched, and debated in order to understand his greatness. There are some interesting facts about Augustus in temples throughout the Roman Empire at the request of the Senate, and the Roman people. Numerous statues of Augustus were erected there. Records that these monuments were venerated throughout the empire for centuries. Curiously, Augustus was even worshipped as a living god, more precisely, as the divine son of Julius Caesar. One of the most important figures of ancient Rome, he was also identified with Apollo, the Greek god of light and reason. Augustus also had refined intelligence. He received a remarkable education together with the other children of the Roman elite. He was educated by the finest teachers of his time. Augustus was both Latin and Greek fluently, which greatly facilitated his political maneuvers and diplomatic relations. He was reportedly one of the most eloquent speakers of his generation. In addition, he succeeded in studying philosophy, literature, and rhetoric from an early age. He learned the art of persuasion, which he knew how to use in a very intelligent way, speaking with measured words, appropriate gestures, and a commanding presence. With regard to his vast knowledge, it should be remembered that Augustus Rome, a cultural center in antiquity with access to the finest libraries, full of many literary works and philosophical treatises. These local circumstances were very important and influential in the cultural formation of the Roman leader. His achievements made him the master of the entire Roman world. As is often the case with historical figures, much information about the life of this remarkable man has been distorted over time. Today, we can find the image of Augustus stamped on countless coins, monuments, and buildings, and his name is known by many people, although not by everyone what he was like in reality. In fact, these physical representations of the figure of the emperor usually consist of one of the many idealized points in his story regarding Augustus' appearance. Ancient sources describe him in various ways. He wasn't exceptionally tall, standing at about 5 feet 7 inches, but he carried himself with great dignity. We can also get an idea of how he was physically through various statues that were created during his lifetime. These objects are the most reliable sources for us to imagine what he looked like. There are also numerous busts sculpted over time that represent the emperor. When we see these sculptures, we notice the classical features: refined nose and calm expression. In fact, Augustus was depicted in an idealized manner following Greek artistic traditions. Taking into account these artistic representations, we can conclude that perhaps he was not as imposing physically as some later emperors, but one thing is certain: his political genius and way of governing surpassed any physical attribute. Let's see now why Augustus belonged to the Julian family through his mother Asia, who was the niece of Julius Caesar. This connection would prove crucial for his rise to power. His father, Gaius Octavius, was a senator and governor who died when the young Octavius was only 4 years old. His mother remarried, and the boy was raised in a household that valued traditional Roman virtues. This imposing family was one of the most ancient patrician families in Rome. With his adoption by Julius Caesar, his status was elevated beyond measure. An ancestor connection to the divine Julius, as Caesar came to be known after his deification, was among the most important factors in Augustus' political legitimacy. After Caesar's assassination, the young Octavius took the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. In view of this genealogical connection, it is important to remember that the powerful Augustus referred to in this account began his political career as Octavian, the name by which he was known during his early years of struggle for power in Rome. The young man lived in a city that was the center of a vast republic full of political intrigue and dangerous rivalries. The city was magnificent, with impressive temples, beautiful public buildings, and a complex social structure. There were forums decorated with statues, monuments, and fountains. This fantastic city was constantly being embellished with successive generations of leaders and ambitious politicians. The site became the most powerful city in the Mediterranean. Octavian, nephew of Julius Caesar, grew up in this reality. He had a sister, Octavia Minor, who would play an important role in his political alliances, and he had various relatives and connections through his famous great-uncle. When Julius Caesar was assassinated, Octavian was only 18 years old studying in Apollonia in modern-day Albania. It is important to underline that the Roman Republic had as one of its main characteristics the violent political struggles. Later, Octavian would face many rivals, including Mark Antony, and eventually, his former ally would be defeated at the Battle of Actium. The fate of many who opposed Octavian was similar. Cleopatra began her involvement with Roman politics through Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony. But Octavian would emerge victorious. Octavian began his rise to power at the age of 18 after the assassination of his great-uncle Julius Caesar. According to Roman custom, he accepted Caesar's adoption and became his legal heir, who at the time inherited not only Caesar's name and wealth, but also his veterans and political supporters. Sometime after Octavian arrived in Italy from Apollonia, the political situation in Rome was extremely volatile. Mark Antony, Caesar's former lieutenant, began to consolidate power without considering the young heir seriously. Marcus Tullius Cicero, the great orator, and 3 important senators were among those who initially underestimated Octavian. The young man, during his early political career, wanted to maintain his connection to Caesar's legacy. In a showcase of his strategic skills, his goal was to strengthen his position with Caesar's veterans, who could be important allies. In the event of a civil war in Rome, his main challenge would be dealing with Mark Antony, leader of the Caesarian faction. These political maneuvers led to Octavian being seen as a threat by Antony for claiming Caesar's inheritance at the age of 19. The young heir was forced to build his own power base and gathered support from Caesar's former soldiers. The experienced Mark Antony and his supporters decided to dismiss the young Octavian and prevent his rise to power at all costs. However, during their political maneuvering, they learned of the unexpected development. Octavian, who seemed like a naive youth, was proving to be a formidable politician. He thought he would be able to use the Senate against Antony, since the senators feared Antony's growing power. Octavian was a skilled negotiator throughout his early career. He made alliances with various factions in the Senate, and among the people. After initial conflicts with Mark Antony, the calculating Octavian eventually made peace with his rival. A conflict had divided the Roman world between the liberators who killed Caesar and the Caesarians who sought revenge. This conflict became known as the Liberators' Civil War upon learning that the assassins of Caesar had fled to the eastern provinces, the Caesarian. Partisans reflected on their strategy. Helping each other was necessary, because the liberators commanded significant forces. Moreover, Octavian and his allies believed that Mark Antony could be a valuable partner in avenging Caesar and consolidating power over Rome. But Antony had been dismissive of the young Octavian. Therefore, if they did not cooperate, he could become an enemy, making the situation more dangerous for everyone. Cicero and the 2 other influential senators reflected on the matter. It was a difficult decision, and the consequences could be risky, but eventually, as the political leaders struggled to find the solution, Octavian, with his intelligence, looked at the situation and proposed an alliance. The choice had been made to work together temporarily and establish the Second Triumvirate with Mark Antony and Lepidus. As the triumvirs approached their enemies, they felt they would be able to defeat the liberators, but there was already a plan set up for the future of Rome, pretending that they would share power equally. But as soon as the liberators were defeated, the triumvirate began to show cracks. A few years later, the Battle of Philippi occurred in Macedonia, where the triumvirs sought out Brutus and Cassius, the leading assassins of Caesar. The Caesarians showed their military might, and the liberators were defeated. Brutus and Cassius both committed suicide on Octavian's orders. Many of the conspirators were executed or fled. Octavian, with his fellow triumvirs, went about reorganizing the Roman territories, where they established their authority and informed the Roman world that they would divide the provinces among themselves. It is important to remember that Mark Antony was assigned the eastern provinces when he was informed of his responsibilities. He headed for those regions, and Cleopatra, how could she maintain her position if Egypt was now under Roman influence? And if the triumvirs wanted control over all territories, she was in a precarious situation, and she knew that she needed a powerful protector. Then had a rather bold idea. In order to meet Mark Antony, she created a plan, and to put it into practice, had the help of her considerable resources and charm. They arranged a meeting, where the queen made a spectacular entrance, sailing up the river Cydnus in a magnificent barge. When they met, Cleopatra, still with the help of her intelligence and resources, impressed Mark Antony completely. We don't know exactly what the Romans' initial intentions were when he summoned Cleopatra, but the Egyptian woman conquered him immediately. With Antony by her side, everything would be easier for maintaining Egypt's independence, the opportunity to secure her kingdom and rule according to her interests. was finally within her reach with the eastern provinces under Antony's control. Octavian had a strategic position in the West. Cleopatra used her relationship with Antony to her advantage. The queen convinced Antony that she was the right partner for controlling the eastern Mediterranean. The Queen of Egypt and Mark Antony entered a loving relationship. Antony's decision to favor Cleopatra angered Octavian, who saw this as a threat to Roman interests. The Roman leader Octavian was building his power base in Italy and took a patient approach. This period became known as the era of the Second Triumvirate. Octavian and his supporters worked hard to consolidate their position, preparing for the inevitable conflict. When the final confrontation came, Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra's forces at the Battle of Actium. The former triumvir and the Egyptian queen both died shortly after. With Mark Antony's death, the path was clear for Octavian to become the sole ruler of Rome. Antony's support of Cleopatra had been used against him by Octavian's propaganda. The young leader returned to Rome, and Octavian reigned over the Roman world. Everything seemed to go according to plan. But a huge transformation would eventually happen. Octavian had consolidated his power over the entire Roman world, and under his administration, Rome prospered, and the city experienced a cultural golden age. Financed by the Emperor Octavian, now known as Augustus, organized magnificent building projects in the city. He stayed in a modest house on the Palatine Hill. Despite his immense power, the Roman leader Augustus was at the height of his power, and as the leader of his nation made several political and social reforms. He also organized triumphs in his honor. The parades of Augustus had the presence of captured enemies displayed as prisoners, symbols of Rome's victories over various peoples. Augustus transformed the city and famously claimed that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble, the capital of the Roman Empire. Augustus's consolidation of power was viewed with mixed feelings by the Roman elite. There were those who mourned the loss of the Republic, and those who welcomed the stability after decades of civil war. Augustus was named Princeps, meaning first citizen, and had unparalleled power. The Roman senators retained some of their traditional roles, but real authority rested with Augustus. He reformed the government in 27 BC, when the Senate granted him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. Chaos had finally ended in Rome. Augustus pursued a careful policy of maintaining republican traditions while holding absolute power in a Senate session. He presented himself as the restorer of the Republic's stability. Returned to Rome, Augustus, the first emperor, pursued policies of expansion and consolidation. Provinces throughout the empire. He read his own account of his achievements, the Res Gesti, in which his accomplishments were detailed. Rome was now the undisputed center of the Mediterranean world, and Augustus ruled it with wisdom. There was a remarkable transformation of Rome under Augustus in the years following 27 BC. He sent administrators throughout the provinces. Through these men, he established order and efficient governance in territories across the known world. The Roman Empire reached new heights of prosperity under his rule. The administration was reformed with professional bureaucrats, replacing the often corrupt officials of the Republican era. The entire system was reorganized to ensure loyalty to Augustus. The emperor, beautiful and strategic, was served by capable advisors, and the empire had unprecedented stability. Augustus implemented social and moral reforms. He promoted traditional Roman values and encouraged marriage and childbearing among the upper classes. The population benefited from his policies. Still in his reign, Augustus dealt with various challenges to his authority. However, after establishing his position firmly and creating an effective government, the emperor continued to rule successfully. The couple of Augustus and his wife Livia became the model of Roman virtue. Although there were no sons from their union, Augustus adopted heirs to continue his legacy. The children of his previous marriages and relatives were groomed for succession. Tiberius, Livia's son from her first marriage, eventually became Augustus's heir. During Augustus's long reign, which lasted over 40 years, he transformed every aspect of Roman life. He even created the Praetorian Guard, a personal bodyguard that would play a crucial role in future imperial politics. During his rule, where he brought peace and prosperity to the Roman world, he created what became known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Although he maintained military strength and expanded the empire's borders, the focus was on consolidation and administration. Augustus, after establishing his power, became the model for all future emperors. Later, his legacy would be so profound that all subsequent rulers would measure themselves against his achievements. The power in Rome was concentrated in Augustus's hands. He ruled with a combination of traditional authority and personal charisma. While Augustus managed both military and civilian affairs, the romance between military glory and civic duty was embodied in his reign. they coexisted in Augustus's vision of Rome, where both seemed perfectly balanced in Rome. The emperor had many monuments and buildings constructed where they displayed his achievements and the glory of the empire. However, the emperor was careful to maintain the appearance of republican government. After building his power base carefully, Augustus was forced to deal with various conspiracies and threats. Throughout his reign, the senators and other ambitious men occasionally plotted against him. Augustus reproved treason and was vigilant about maintaining his position. In part, this was due to his understanding of Roman history and the fate of Julius Caesar, who had been too lenient with his enemies. A new era had begun in Rome with the Principate of Augustus. The supporters of the old republic and the defenders of the new order coexisted uneasily. The golden age of Augustus happened during his long reign in Rome, where both military victories and cultural achievements flourished. Augustus accompanied the empire as it headed towards unprecedented prosperity. But when challenges arose, he addressed them with characteristic intelligence and political skill. Augustus achieved decisive victories in various campaigns, and these victories marked the transition from republic to empire and the beginning of the imperial period. However, his rule was not without difficulties. Eventually, the empire faced setbacks. While Augustus tried to maintain control and expand Roman territory, he did everything he could so that the empire could continue to grow and prosper. But after some military disasters, particularly in Germany, was more cautious about expansion. Some sources say he would have been content with the existing borders if Rome could have maintained them, ignoring further conquest. The Roman emperor continued to try to secure his legacy, while he tried to discover, together with his advisors, the best succession plan. Augustus was preparing for the future. The end of Augustus's life was marked by personal tragedies, while Augustus tried to secure the succession with various heirs who had already been designated. Several of them died before him. The emperor experienced the news that his chosen successors had predeceased him. Desperate, he had to continually revise his plans and designate new heirs. However, fate was not kind, and Augustus lost many of his preferred choices. While he was aging and reflecting on his long reign, he was informed that Tiberius, his stepson, would be his successor. When he reached the final years of his life, Augustus had already ensured the continuity of his system. His last years were spent in relative peace. Before dying, however, in the presence of his beloved wife Livia, he reportedly asked whether he had played his part well in the comedy of life. After this reflection, the great Roman Augustus died at the age of 75 sometime later. The Senate deified him, making him officially a god at that time. At imperial funerals, it was common for elaborate ceremonies to be held accompanied by proclamations of the deceased emperor's divinity. That's what happened for Augustus in front of the Roman people. His funeral was magnificent, and he was laid to rest in his mausoleum on the orders of the Senate. However, the empire continued under Tiberius, who followed Augustus's example, so that the system could endure. But the Senate and people of Rome recognized that something fundamental had changed. Rome gave in, and out of respect for Augustus, accepted the imperial system until it became the standard form of government. Augustus also had an impactful legacy. It was one of the achievements that eternalized him in history. The emperor succeeded in transforming the Roman state from a republic torn by civil war into a stable empire. But he maintained the appearance of republican government going through the transition without declaring himself king. That would have been too dangerous for a Roman leader. As for his legacy, the empire he created lasted for centuries, and the system he established became the model for governance. The reforms Augustus implemented were fundamental to Rome's success. He was constantly remembered by later emperors, since he had created the template for imperial rule. After his death, Augustus's plans for succession were fulfilled. The emperor, always strategic, ensured the continuation of his system in advance. Finally, even though there were later emperors who claimed to surpass him, it's more likely that none achieved the fundamental transformation that Augustus accomplished, which created the Roman Empire from the ruins of the Republic. The time of his death he was found having passed peacefully. People claimed that he had a serene expression. He died after a reign of 41 years. As emperor, his funeral was solemn and magnificent, worthy of a Roman emperor. His deification by the Senate was expected after the death of the powerful emperor. Rome continued as an empire under the Julio-Claudian dynasty. It was the continuation of the system Augustus had created in Rome. Augustus's story is fascinating. Many of his successors were important Roman rulers who followed his example. Curiously, the imperial system at that time proved more stable than the late republic had been. Augustus did not play a secondary role in Roman history and was a transformative figure. His life journey was particularly impressive and influential in many ways. Firstly, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which is notable due to Augustus's establishment of the imperial system. This innovation indeed was refined by Augustus, but regardless of the changes, Roman government remained very important to Western civilization, and Augustus had major responsibilities and had to make important decisions throughout his life as ruler of Rome. He had supporters and opponents. He was skillful, calculating, and extremely influential. He was a rare, exceptional, quite determined man. He always had strategies to achieve all his goals. Augustus impressed everyone because of his political genius, and also because of his administrative intelligence. The profile of the emperor with all these qualities allowed him to transform the entire Roman world, and as time went by, Augustus's figure was often idealized, and the Roman leader was seen as the model emperor at times. It seems that his entire life path and achievement centered on bringing peace after civil war. But this view of the emperor's life is incomplete, since he had great political, military, and cultural achievements. In any case, the legendary Roman emperor has become a source of inspiration for some of the greatest leaders in history, among them various emperors who followed his example and countless statesmen throughout the centuries. In their hands, the ruler became an illustrious model of governance. As we learn more about his story, we realize it's not by chance that Augustus has fascinated so many people in his time and continues to captivate so many others in this day and